Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, I'll say from the outset that the Labor Party will support this bill to select committee. But could I just point out that if there was ever an example of a government dragged kicking and screaming to the point of reality where they had to do something, had to be seen to do something in respect of corralling property speculation, this is it. Now, the truth about this, sir, is this is a total rush job, and I'll provide a bit of evidence as to that. The first is that the Minister, Louise Upston, who's putting forward this bill, wasn't involved in any of the actual policy development. Now, how do we know that? Because she wasn't told until the 28th of April, when she said she was told about this proposal verbally when it was announced on the 17th of May. And we know this because she said that in answer to a parliamentary question. The question read, quote, "Was she, that is the Minister, made aware prior to its announcement that the government was going to implement new IRD number requirements for non-resident purchases of New Zealand homes? If so, on what date and how was she informed?" Answer, I was informed of the proposals verbally on the 28th of April. This was a hash job, and I've got to say, sir, I do feel a bit sorry for the Minister, Louise Upton. It's sort of the Nick Smith effect. You know, there's somebody else who's sort of carted in, even Todd McClay, same deal, carted in to be the person with the shovel following the elephant, trying to clean the mess up. The second evidence of a hash job and a rush job, sir, is if you look at the regulatory impact statements. The IRD says they were unable to estimate compliance costs or consult with potentially affected parties because of, quote unquote, time constraints. That is, that this government has done nothing about an overseas buyer register for years and now panics at the last minute because they've got to be seen to be doing something because the sustained pressure provided by the community and this opposition to alert these people to the housing crisis that exists and the speculatory impact in relation to that housing crisis. The feet of the government's finally put to the fire, so what do? They rush this out. They rush it out. Now, we'll support it to select committee, sir, because we've maintained that there should be, for instance, dealing with the overseas buyer issue, a register of overseas buyers, but we want to make sure it's real and it's effective. But of course, the Minister gets up and perpetrates the myth in respect to what is a register. You know, it looks like a register, sounds like a register, and smells like a register, therefore it's a register. But she perpetuates a myth, of course, that was first kicked off in the Select Committee last week by the Minister of Revenue, who said, this isn't a register. Quote, it is a collection of information, unquote. So it's not a register. It's a collection of information. I suppose if we look up the sort of Oxford Dictionary, we could call it a database, we could call it a record, we could call it an inventory, we could call it anything you like. But I've got to say, the average Joe out on the street, who is an intelligent human being as they are, will see it for what it is. It's a register. I just say to the Minister, look, give up. Why have this paltry argument? For years they've said it was too expensive. In fact, it was Nick Smith, the fiasco minister, the minister of fiascos, who said, quote, a register would be, quote, a distraction. Well, let's call it a collection of data. A collection of data might be, Mr Speaker, a distraction, he said. That would cost, quote unquote, mega millions without doing a thing to tackle housing inflation. He went on in his own inimitable and stable way to say the following. This is just about politics. It would be a waste of public money when we'd be trying to work out whether it was 1.2% or 1.4%. Then we have the Prime Minister, sir, who said, we're not hostile to the idea of a register, he quotes, we just don't think it takes you very far. So calling it a register or a collection of information or something else, I mean, Minister, fair go. I know you've been dropped in it. I know that you were told at the last minute that this was going to happen, and they said, Louise, they said, step up to the plate, we need you to take one for the team. We need you to take a hit. And I feel sorry for the minister because this is becoming a pattern. Todd McClay for Peter Dunn, the whole government for Nick Smith, including the people of New Zealand. But let's call it what it is. And I'm pleased that the government finally has had the road to Damascus experience, trying to dress it up as their own idea, and they're actually going to monitor, have a register of foreign buyers so we can ascertain some evidence around this, even though they denied that. Now, the IRD make another, and I'll be interested in the Select Committee to deal with this, another series of interesting recommendations. For instance, they recommended to the government that they do not exempt main homes from the register, that is the register, because it would not reduce compliance costs for purchasers of a main home, as almost all would have an NZ IRD number anyway. So, for example, a person who could buy a main home and then a few months later make it not into their main home, but the IRD number has no way of tracking this. So I'll be interested in the Select Committee process, sir, to actually tease that out. The bill says a person selling their third quote-unquote main home in a 2-year period would have to provide an IRD number on sale. But that is going to be very hard to police if the number isn't collected at each sale of the main home, I would have thought. Now, I know Chris Bishop, who's a pretty intelligent bloke, who sits on FEC. I'm sure he'll be able to get up and rebut all the points I've made and provide an answer to a pretty practical question, which that is. But that provides, again, sir, evidence of a bill that's been rushed, that hasn't been thought out, that's just been hashed together because the government has to be seen to do something. And it's interesting that the minister talks about the bright line test and a 2-year hold on property. Well, if you have a look in Auckland, those who sell property inside the 2-year bracket, it equates to 15%, if you have a look at the publicly available figures. And what the government's done with this is somehow proposed to the New Zealand people, or built up the perception, that if you don't get in by 1 October, the bright line test, of course, comes into play. But then after the bright line test, 2 years and 1 day, the perception is it's all free, it's all dandy. When the reality is that the basic intent test, the intent test, for instance, that's existed time immemorial, will kick in after that 2-year period. But I asked the minister a couple of quick questions. So if a person buys after 1 October and says to their lawyer, well, we want to buy a property in we want to buy a property in Queenstown. Why? Because at some stage in the future, I might move from Auckland to Queenstown and get a job or retire there, or my partner might want to, sort of go there and, move town. And then in 2 years and 1 day, they sell the property and the IRD comes and knocks on the door, I don't know, sort of balaclava clad. They're going to knock on every door in the country of people. With thermal imaging equipment or whatever, they're going to knock on every door and they say, you sold that, what was your intent? Well, my intent was to move down there. Well, you haven't moved down there. Okay, why? The wife changed her mind, the husband changed his mind. So what's the IRD going to do then? They're going to take every New Zealander to court to try and prove that their intent was otherwise. And to try and prove that their intent is otherwise. Now, I would argue basically, and having talked to some tax experts, not the vintner at the back, but some tax experts there, that you could actually shoot peas through their proposed bright line test and their 2-year hold. But coming back to this particular bill, sir, we will support it to Select Committee. We actually want to see the detail. We congratulate the government for finally actually admitting that there is a need for an overseas register. We think there are a number of holes in terms of the overseas register and the domestic requirements, and we do have sympathy for the minister who's proposing this, given she was told a week or so beforehand, and she's been told to come down here, take the hit, and argue that a collection of data, that a register is not a register, it's a collection, an inventory, or a set of data. My advice to Louise Upston is raise the white flag and let's get on with trying to produce a decent bill out of this sort of rush-hashed sort of cosmetic performance that the government's put on for us today.
I call David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's great to follow from that Bush lawyer who